I actually went back when I wrote my piece and looked over the House of Representatives report that they did last October, the big study into tech giants, and it's a huge document, but I was interested to know what they'd said specifically about the public cloud, and they went out and talked to people like Snap, which does the Snapchat messaging service, and the Snap's quoted in it saying if we tried to move from Google or AWS to another platform, we'd incur massive problems in terms of time and expense. So you basically have lock-in.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're in the studio again, and it's a lovely day outside, isn't it?
It's really nice.
We just had a cheeky sharpener before we started, sitting outside in the sun. The place just at the bottom of this building we're in has got deck chairs, and we could hardly get. It's really full, wasn't it?
It was.
I think that's one of the coolest things, other than the fact that I like going out and drinking beer in the sun. It's just seeing everyone else out.
Yeah.
Just living their lives, doing normal, cool stuff.
Well, hopefully it's like this everywhere soon.
Well, I tell you, I mean, there's a place down the road from us which is nice because they do food and they deliver it to your table, and you do it all through your app. So it's really handy. Because I don't know about you, I hate having to interact with people if I possibly can avoid it. I mean,
you
serving
embrace
people.
This sitting at the table.
Well,
and
just having an app instead of
of
having to wait for someone to come up and then you go.
I quite like being able to go to the bar in a pub and stand at the bar.
No, I don't like that.
You don't like that? If it's busy, I don't like it. But if it's not busy, I
would
quite
like to sit at a table where they've got some kind of Vegas style, like touch screen. There's a restaurant in London.
Hell.
There's a restaurant in London that sells more champagne, like per square foot or per visitor or whatever, than any other restaurant, certainly in London, maybe the world. And the whole reason it does is it's got a button, an analog button that just says champagne at each table. And people just go,
and it showers you with champagne when you push
exactly, like a sprinkler system. And yeah, that's what you want, a little touch screen. There you go, do you want to have a beer? Yeah, all right. Press. That's it.
Yeah.
But then a person
that easy
comes
to use.
Yeah, a person comes, but I don't have to go to a bar. I don't have to wait to be served. I don't have to have a little chat. I just go press.
The trouble is,
it's
lots of apps having
the Amazonification.
All
of
these apps
pissed.
on your phone, and then you have to enter your card details into all of them, and it's a bit of a faff.
It's getting easier. It's getting easier. You're looking for problems, mate. I want solutions. Okay.
It's not good for old people.
No. What are you trying to say?
Well.
That's normally Pierre's normally the ageist. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, but it's all good, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I reckon we might go for a little stroll on the South Bank after, something like that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Holding hands.
Dead romantic. What are we going to talk about?
We can swing Pierre between us like a little toddler.
Excellent. One more. Okay. This has got weird. What are we going to talk about?
This has ended here.
What are we going to talk about apart from weirdness? We're going to start by talking about OpenRAN. There have been a few developments this week that are quite relevant. So that'll be our one that we sort of go on about for longer than we should. Then we're going to talk about quarterlies. We're in the middle of quarterly season. We had Ericsson's, and maybe we'll talk about one or two others and try and convince you why you should care.
I know where you're going with that one.
Well, it's just sometimes quarterlies. I hardly ever write up operator quarterlies because they're always
they
boring.
are usually quite dull. Unless they say something exciting on the call about we're going to buy someone, or which they usually do anyway because they're
if
not
it's
allowed
just
to,
like our ARPU was 0.1% better than last quarter, who cares?
It's often like that.
Well, they're utilities.
Yes.
Sorry, operators, but you're utilities.
Sometimes BT says we're going to extend fibre to every home ever,
right,
and they haven't said anything close to that before, so that makes it interesting. But
okay, well let's see. We'll let everyone wait and see whether this lot of quarterlies is going to be interesting. And then we're going to finish off with a look at AI, artificial intelligence. There's been some attempt at regulation from the European Union, and there have been one or two sort of AI incidents that bring out my inner, oh my God, the machines are taking over, Terminator. Pierre, that must be the one little sort of sound effect that you got the most use out of.
It's played out now.
All right, we've done that. We find a new one. Find a Matrix sound effect. I think that often applies as well.
Oh.
Especially when you start to get into, like, we might talk about that, things like digital currencies and social credit systems and all that. That's a bit more Matrixy.
I can't remember the music to the Matrix.
Well, at the end, they had Rage Against the Machine, Wake Up.
Oh, okay.
No, but they have
That's
that,
easy
like...
enough.
Which actually it's only just occurred to me that the lyric was... I mean, I thought it was just because it's a great track.
Wake Up.
But the lyric...
Isn't it Wake Up?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, the name of the
Rob
song.
Zombie as well.
Is he in the soundtrack?
He's got one track in there, yeah.
Oh, what's
Rob
that called?
Dugan.
Don't list all the people.
No, but like...
This is a Telecoms podcast.
What's this got to do with OpenRAN?
No, but they have... The Matrix had that little, like, jingle almost, like a little high-pitched little noise to make, it makes you say,
yes.
something's off,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'll try to find that now.
What, like that sort of modem noise?
No, it's like a...
Yeah. Anyway. That's what I was trying to say. Yes, and just to remind you that if you're watching us on the site, you can also watch it on Facebook and YouTube, and you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Right, OpenRAN. So there's actually a few OpenRAN relevant stories this week. I was thinking of starting off with Vodafone, but you think the Dish one is even more relevant.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was the big story of the week, really, telecom-wise.
fair enough. I'll as often
not
happy
to
to
sort
defer
of,
to you.
Take the wind out of Vodafone sales or anything.
But given that you just decided this is your fucking podcast, why don't you tell us about the Dish story?
So it was. It's kind of OpenRAN. I suppose maybe it isn't the big OpenRAN story of the week because the OpenRAN side to it wasn't the main focus. But they've basically announced one of their other deals that they've kind of queued up all these vendors and suppliers over the last few months. Should just make clear if people don't know who Dish is. Dish is kind of a big satellite company in the US, which is building a fourth mobile network there. So
Dish is like America's Rakuten.
Exactly like Rakuten, and sort of seem to be basing their model very much on Rakuten. Seem to have been in contact with Rakuten a lot, looking at using some of the same suppliers and technologies. It's all very, it's greenfield, so it's all taking advantage of the latest and greatest you can get in
and
tech.
Greenfield, the significance of greenfield in this case is that they can just start from scratch. They don't have to be building on top of legacy stuff.
Yeah, and so they've taken advantage of a lot of the technologies that we've seen rolled out in the kind of by the internet companies. It's very software based. They're using OpenRAN, which is the use of more open interfaces in the radio network, so you can mix and match suppliers. You can virtualize things more easily. And it's all very state of the art. And the thing they announced this week, which was really dramatic, I thought, was a deal with AWS. So lots of, we've seen several deals. We talked about it on this podcast before, deals between public cloud giants and telcos where they're
more often than not AWS.
Yeah, more often, yes, that's the big one. Sometimes Microsoft Azure, but deals where operators are basically moving.
Google, was it DT went all in on Google? Was it?
I think DT went all in on Azure, but Google's there as well, definitely. Right. And it's usually deals where operators are moving some of their IT estate into the public cloud for efficiency benefits.
In its most benign form, the cloud, let's not forget, the cloud is actually a physical thing. It's a fucking great big data center. Mm-hmm. And in its most benign form, the public cloud is simply going, why should we have our own data center that we've got to deal with when data centers are not a core competence of ours?
Yep.
And we can basically outsource that whole shizzle to someone else.
Exactly, yeah. And Three is an example of a smaller operator that's done it in the UK, where they've put a lot of their servers and IT systems into Azure, which means they can they don't own any of that equipment anymore. They can get rid of a lot of staff. It gets managed through kind of through Azure, and it's using their kind of resources instead, and you get huge savings ideally, and you can boost your profit margins and you're more competitive. So kind of what's not to like? And that's the the kind of proponents argument anyway.
Yeah, and then you hear about there's certain ways, like I did, but I was slightly sort of snarky in my.
Well, so was I. I did something this morning.
So you get what is it? Agility. You can't ever talk about public cloud without using the word agility.
Yeah.
And agility, again, its most benign form, just refers to the fact that because a lot more functions are softwareized, this is back to like NFV and all that sort of thing, because a lot more functions are softwareized, you can therefore scale them, chop and change them, power them up, power them down, fuck about with them in a way you couldn't do if you were committed to actual chunks of hardware.
Yeah, exactly.
And then so you get scalability. There's a sort of boilerplate of things that always have to be said. I thought, sorry to interrupt, I'll let you get back to your stream in a sec, but one thing that I couldn't help laughing about in reading the Dish AWS press release is how much they laboured the point about public cloud.
Yeah.
There was paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of agility and scalability and leverage and all that sort of thing.
That gets to why it's so significant, I suppose, because it's not just putting a bit of the IT estate into the cloud or, running a few core network functions that are serving a particular segment of the market, which is what you've got other operators talking about doing. They've pretty much put everything into the public cloud.
Yeah.
The only stuff
everything that can be.
The only stuff that's not gone into AWS data centers are cables and antennas and things that you can't actually softwareize. Anything else they've put into AWS.
Just the whole network.
Their whole network is basically going to be a part of the AWS cloud, and it's just it's easy for them to do because they're greenfield. They're starting from scratch. I talked to James Crawshaw, who's an analyst at Omdia, about this, and he said other operators have got a lot of stranded assets, he used the word, that are sitting around, that they're not just going to sort of dump all of that and suddenly start, running stuff from AWS, and the transition would be very difficult.
Yeah, because there's like simple like balance sheet problems with doing that.
There's huge ones,
then you have to write stuff off.
Exactly, yeah. And to try and move from doing it on premise or in a private cloud to doing it
but
in
I do
the cloud
think that
is
stranded
difficult.
asset, and I hadn't heard that word, but I think that's a good one. Thanks, James. Is often a weight around their neck, because it leads to throwing good money after bad sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just why can't we just...
I think you have to go through this difficult
again.
transition. I mean, 3 is a really interesting example of a small operator that's trying to do it. So it's presumably easier for them in a way. They've only got, 3 UK, this is, not 3, across Europe, where they're going into Azure, and they've had cost challenges for a couple of years now. And one of the problems, as I understand it from talking to them, is that they've basically got 2 systems on the go at the moment. And until they get every single customer over from their old kind of servers, the old systems, into the Azure side of things, they can't shut all of that down. So that they might only have a few customers on it, but they're still incurring costs to maintain it.
Yeah.
And once they've all moved, then you should...
There's SLAs that say
if it goes
got
right, you should see this drop off in operating costs.
Right.
It's not going to mean that profits double or anything like that, but it's quite a big difference in terms of the IT costs. And then they have this more efficient model where it's all being run through the public cloud. But what Dish has done is just altogether more dramatic.
I got the impression it's like the first time there's this degree of commitment by an operator.
It's James, who we just mentioned, said it's the most dramatic example there is in the market so far of someone doing that. And I suppose it had to come from a greenfield player, but Rakuten hasn't done anything like that. I mean, they're kind of an e-commerce company anyway, and an internet company, but they're satellite based, aren't they? They're not a public cloud anyway. Put it like that. So
right.
So they've taken a massive plunge, and it's. I think I took a similar line to you, hearing what your headline was about, Faustian Pact with AWS. I have been all along.
We're both
anybody knows from listening to these sessions that I'm GB. I mean, I find it interesting. I actually went back when I wrote my piece and looked over the House of Representatives report that they did last October. The big study into tech giants, and it's a huge document, but I was interested to know what they said specifically about the public cloud. And they went out and talked to people like Snap, which does the Snapchat messaging service, and the Snap's quoted in it saying, if we tried to move from Google or AWS to another platform, we'd incur massive problems in terms of time and expense. So you basically have lock-in. You have this, this word vendor lock-in, this expression vendor lock-in that's been used in the industry for ages, is what these companies face in going in with these companies.
So there we have the crowning irony, which is that OpenRAN is supposed to be about circumventing vendor lock-in. All you're doing is transferring your Faustian Pact from one set of vendors to another.
Yeah.
And I thought a really interesting thing, I don't think I read your coverage of it, I certainly didn't when I when I'd written my story. But the FT did a really good job. They got interviews with this chap Ergen, who's heads up Dish,
right,
and the new CEO of Amazon, who for a long time has been the CEO of AWS, whose name I forget, but anyway, whatever. They chatted to Ergen, and he said his quote that he gave the FT over and above his canned quote from the press release. I'm going to read it out. He goes, "It gives the US a chance to get back into a leadership position in telecoms. The best cloud providers in the world are in the US. Nobody writes better software than the US. And now with OpenRAN, we're able to use American suppliers for radio." So he said US or American 3 or 4 times in that one little quote.
Yeah.
Now, he's obviously, and I think I actually did link to light reading in my sort of concluding paragraph. Yes, Mike
did a story earlier in the week.
So Mike wrote a piece headlined "Hat in Hand, OpenRAN cheerleaders zoom to Washington."
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a play on words about Zoom, but then you should have capitalised. You should capitalise the Z. Come on, Mike. You're missing a pun there, son.
Well, that's a copy editing flaw, isn't
copy
it?
Paul, then.
That's Paul, what are you doing? he probably doesn't watch the podcast this far in. We'll have to tell him to this time.
Not these days. But yes, and so I linked to that because for him to sort of bang on about America this, America that, seems to me like this move seemed to be very influenced by political stuff.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why bang on about the US? And we've said this loads of times on this podcast, and certainly in our writing, that OpenRAN is as much a political as a technological thing because of the situation that's been created by banning Chinese vendors and thus creating a duopoly of Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's even just that, actually. I think it is also just techno-nationalism, if I can coin a phrase. They're like, hold on a sec, how come we let it get to a stage where the Chinese were kicking our asses on this stuff? Like there was one little bit, another little quote, was it? Yes, here we are. Sorry, let me just read this as well. Oh, yes. It must be noted, Ergen also said, in reference to a wholesale move to the public cloud, "This is not our first rodeo," which I thought, nice. Go on, son. He's not afraid to use cliches like that. I respect that. But he was talking about getting the US back to a telecoms leadership position. So this firstly confirms my point that this is telecoms has just become a matter of brute geopolitical competition for them. Also, was America ever the leader? I mean, it used to be Europe back in.
Well, I suppose it depends what you're looking
days.
At, doesn't it? Because there's all sorts of different parts of the telecom value chain. So,
well, in terms of networks, I don't think America was ever a leader.
It's odd how he's talking about America going back to being a leader based on a deal with a public cloud, which isn't strictly telecom.
Yeah, but it's an American company.
Well, exactly. So you can base it on all sorts. I mean, you could say America's got a bigger position in 5G than they actually believe because they control all the semiconductor technology designs that are behind it. So I suppose it depends how you look at it. But I mean, going back to the sort of Dish AWS deal and
yes.
whether you should do a deal with a public cloud or not. I know there are people who think it's absolutely moronic to even resist the idea of a public cloud deal, and and we had some commentary on that this week with people saying if you don't, then your business plan's going to be
it's just like a fait accompli.
You have to do. But the thing is that if everybody follows that logic, if everybody goes down that route, then 3 US companies will end up hosting the majority of the Western world's
and then at the same
systems.
time, we've got all the politicians bitching and moaning about these same companies having too much power.
Exactly.
There's no coherence to this.
No, there isn't at all. And I actually think that type of oligopoly to me is far more worrying than the one that people seem to be very concerned about at the moment. It's very pervasive. I mean, Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei. I mean, forget Huawei because it's kind of disappearing from the scene, I think, in outside China and some other markets. But Ericsson and Nokia do one part of the network. They do the radio, which is extremely important and actually where a lot of the spending goes. But they don't. They don't have the sort of ambitions that Amazon and Google and Microsoft have to dominate almost everything. We see this. The sorts of this Dish deal is actually really interesting if you look at some other aspects of it, like the potential for the two companies to partner on edge computing. Which is another area where we see years ago, the operators, I remember going to conferences and the telcos were talking about the edge as an opportunity where they could really dominate and they could really take a leadership role. And you've got all these interesting little companies coming along like Mobile Edge X, which is actually a telco initiative to try and do the middleware platform. And, basically do the kind of stuff that AWS and Google might want to do. And where are we now in 2021? All these operators have basically ceded ground in the edge. They're all now doing partnerships. Yeah. I mean, I was on a call earlier with Orange's CTO who was getting asked about this. How much do you give away in the edge, basically? Where do you draw the line between what you do and where an internet company comes in? And he was pretty honest about it. He said, well, we can't deny the fact that they're just seriously good at what they do. Yes. And we can't compete against them in technology. As is more or less what he said, really. It's not his exact words.
That's the tricky bit. I mean, we criticise them for selling their soul, but you got to have some sympathy. I mean, this is actually where, while I'll happily quite bash the big tech giants, and probably especially Amazon, or especially AWS, because they antagonise me so much with Parler, which is a US company, by the way. So which is also a worry for anybody doing a deal with AWS. But that's my point. Yeah. So it's all very well going, rah, Star banner, we're all in it together, us against the Chinese. But they'll quite happily shit on a US company. Anyway, I mean, I'll have a pop, but I do sympathise with people who go all in with them, and the narrative of if you don't, then you're going to get left behind, because it's probably true.
Well, this is the thing. If your competitors are doing this, it's like people taking advantage of OpenRAN and you don't. You're going to worry that they're going to have some kind of cost advantage in the years ahead, and maybe you just can't complete
for not doing
exactly. So I can understand why they're doing it, but at the same time, I think from a big picture perspective, which is probably not how a lot of companies think, I don't think these days. They think on the terms of quarterly earnings and how to please shareholders.
Well, these days,
and the CEOs might not even be there in 3 years' time. But if you take a big picture perspective, I think this is all heading towards it's a bit of a scary place. You look at as I say, look at this House of Representatives report. We're already concerned about the dominance of the cloud companies in other areas of the market, and we're not anywhere near that in telecom at the moment. It's only Dish that's done this dramatic deal, but everybody's talking about it.
There's a feeling shifting in that direction.
There's a feeling among some analysts that that's where the market's going, and I'd like to see some resistance to it. I think because I think it could.
It also coincides with an even more macro trend, which has been brought about, which certainly accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic, which is a greater centralisation of economies. So you could argue, obviously economies were centralised in the Second World War, and then you could argue there was a loosening which maybe reached its apex in the 80s, Thatcher, Reagan, of laissez-faire free marketism.
Yeah.
And then after that, things like sort of 9/11, war on terror, and that sort of thing has enlarged the size of the government. And then this pandemic. Every time you get a crisis now, the response is to not just enlarge the size of government, but to also increase the power of government to sort of control daily life, which we've seen massively in this pandemic. I think it's sad that this is even a politically contentious thing to say.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, but they're looking after us, aren't they? Fucking wake up. But yes, this seems part of it. There seems to be so much cajoling and manoeuvring and coercion towards OpenRAN for political ends. Everyone could get along just fine if they only ever bought, even if Nokia didn't get shit together.
Yeah.
Even if they just bought Ericsson kit. It's a Swedish company. Swedes are mellow.
They're
never going to go crazy and try and take over the world.
The other worrying thing that I think about this cloud arrangement when it comes to OpenRAN specifically is what it means for the OpenRAN deployment. But you've seen Microsoft last year buying who was it, Metaswitch and Affirmed, two core network companies. Now, what this deal has shown clearly is that you can also run radio access network functions from the public cloud as well, which nobody's talked about doing really.
That really struck me when I was writing it up.
Yeah, so all of a sudden you've got a possibility. I remember talking to Parallel Wireless about this, the CEO Steve Papper a few months ago. What about a cloud company buying? They've already bought. You've already seen them buy Affirmed and Metaswitch. What about them buying you or Mavenir? And he said his exact words were, he could see the possibility, maybe not of acquisitions, but alliances where you get a public cloud that offers a kind of captive stack of its own software. So you come along to Microsoft and you get Metaswitch pushed at you very heavily, and maybe they've acquired parallel wireless. And there's already signs of this in the
because Rakuten's pushing Altiostar Star and all that.
Rakuten's got its own.
We had last week we were talking about
platform.
Mavenir
Exactly.
with Xilinx.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all so
it's becoming less and less open, and there's already signs of this in the deal with Dish actually, because I think their main software vendors on the RAN side are Mavenir and Altiostar, but it seems you look into the details of this, which Mike covered quite well. That they want to run some of the baseband functions from the public cloud. This is the radio stuff they want to use in the public cloud. Now, the processors that might get used to do that are not Intel x86 ones. They're these Graviton ones that Amazon's been developing, sort of in-house.
I don't even know about that.
Its own in-house Graviton processors are the
sounds very science fiction.
Are the processors the processors that Amazon's developing for its own data centers. So the
shit, I didn't even know Amazon was developing its own.
So the system would run on potentially some of these radio functions would actually run on Graviton and not on the x86 platform, which is what Mavenir's built its entire.
And then you also have to
on.
wonder whether when you go all in. So, just to recap, the reason we get so twitchy about people going all in with any public cloud provider, obviously you've got Parler, which I get certainly twitchy about because freedom of speech is one of my things, but you are giving them power to just one day go, well, hold on, you've gone against some new terms and conditions that we just pulled out of our arse.
Yeah.
So there's ways in which they can exert their will.
Terms and conditions, yeah, because Dish's deployment, if they've been doing this and stayed outside the public cloud, then Intel would have a much bigger role than it's going to end up having. Yeah. And also another company you've got to think about is VMware, okay? VMware was supposed to be the kind of orchestration platform that allows you to move between private and public clouds that Dish did a deal with last year. There's a really good piece by an analyst called Roy Chewer, who's got a company called Avid Networks, I think, but he actually did a piece with Fierce Wireless, which is one of our competitors.
We don't mind talking about our competitors.
No, because we're kind of open like that.
We're even nice open. About Ray.
And it was a really good piece where he said that the whole premise for the VMware arrangement now looks like, that it's almost like an overhead now, that VMware deal.
Right.
So there's all these
because they've
and there's all these other suppliers that have been in the mix that you're starting to look at and think, what does this mean for them that they've gone and done this public cloud deal?
What if AWS is making software, which it doubtless is, that does similar shit to what Mavenir does?
Totally, yeah.
So then you get just as Amazon has killed the high street, and just as Google and Facebook have killed journalism or media business model, then you'll get AWS killing the sort of tier 2
completely.
Cloud software or whatever.
I mean, Mobile Edge X, which is the Deutsche Telekom little sort of software company that it has based in Silicon Valley, that was supposed to be, I remember talking to Alex Choi, who's the sort of senior vice president of technology at DT. He was like, this is going to be the standard, or we hope it could be the standard for middleware and the edge, that everybody uses that platform to run their applications. I don't know where they are now, but they've not announced any big deals for a long, long time. It's all going to people like AWS. What's it called? Wavelength. I mean, Vodafone did a deal with them quite recently. Verizon.
They
now
just
you've
feel
got
like
this Dish arrangement.
Amazon and Google probably more than any other companies. So you got this sort of FANG thing.
Yeah.
And it always makes me laugh because I think they put Netflix in there so that you don't end up saying a homophobic slur. But really, you've got FANG, but Facebook not so much, Apple not so much. It is Apple and Google who are the daddies. They're the ones that control that
Amazon and Google.
Sorry, Amazon. Yeah, my bad. So Apple's got a lot of control in certain areas.
But they're still mainly a hardware company, aren't they, really?
It's because Apple is the most valuable of all of them.
Most what?
Valuable. I think it's...
Yes, well, maybe that comes up as from a pure market cap point of view. You're probably right. But in terms of their influence in adjacent industries, I think it's Google and Amazon.
Yeah, they're the scary ones.
And they just feel like black holes, just sucking up entire sectors.
Yeah.
And they go, nah, we're doing that as well.
Yeah, they're like there was that piece that Matt Taibbi wrote a few years ago about Goldman Sachs, where he described it as like a vampire squid with its blood funnel jabbed about, and that to me is a description of
vampire squid. You can just picture this sort of alien pulsating on your face.
That's what the public clouds are now, actually, more than Goldman Sachs almost. They're the sort of vampire squids with the blood funnel.
And you can bet the Amazon types
everything.
and the Goldman Sachs types go and have high power lunches on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all a bit appalling. And then and then you get governments pitching in, but I'm just not convinced. Whenever they ever go at them, like you have these stupid little set piece moans where they bring Zuckerberg in and they bring Sundar Pichai and
but they don't really get it, do they?
Yeah, well,
I don't think.
No,
completely.
well, they're pathetic. They're just posturing, and they go, "Well, we're not happy about this," and and Jack Dorsey go, oh, "Aren't you?"
Yeah.
And then they go, "Right, well, watch yourself," and you go, "Yeah, I'll do that. Why don't I? I'm really shitting myself now." And I get the impression, and there's some stuff going on. The Biden administration does seem to be going after them, but I just get a nasty feeling that they're just trying to shake them down.
Yeah.
They're not actually trying to do anything. They're not trying to level the playing field. They're not trying to make it so that they're not so absolutely toxic to smaller companies.
I think they don't know what to do.
They just want to get money off them.
Yeah, I mean, they've compared this. They've sort of likened themselves to the kind of, the oil busters, if you like, back in the
or the railroads or
the
railroads,
when those big monopolies got broken up. But there's very little sign of political will to do that, and I think they're just worried about causing economic damage.
Yeah, they'll go, look, well, you've been very naughty. We're going to fine you $100 million.
Yeah,
and they're going, all right, we'll be good from now on. Here's your $100 million, and then it'll just be business as usual.
I think one of the problems is it's an industry they don't really understand because it's so far. And I actually don't think anybody understands it. I mean, we analysts, people who are covering it all the time, struggle to understand it because it's so fast moving and there's so much going on.
They're clever people by definition.
They're extremely clever people. That you've got technologies now being talked about. We're going to talk about AI later. That are just mind-boggling to anybody to get their heads around. So it's very hard to. And these industries are coming along. They're brand new. They're expanding so quickly into new areas all the time. New services are appearing. It's hard to. Yeah. It's harder to stay on top of it, I think, than it was 120 years ago or whatever.
So to draw, because there's one or two other OpenRAN things I want to mention briefly before we move it along. Draw a line on the dish thing. The two. Oh, well done.
Sorry.
Why don't you just make little clinky noises while I'm trying to talk? Amateurs, Pierre. Is significant on two levels. There's the AWS public cloud, Amazon taking over the world level, and then there's the OpenRAN, which was like a sort of subplot within it.
Yeah.
But this segment is about OpenRAN, so I figure I better bring it back to that, which is that while that wasn't the big part of the press release, certainly in their chats with the FT after, going on about OpenRAN and waving the flag and all that sort of thing. And the fact that this revealed quite how much of OpenRAN can be moved to the public cloud, everything except the physical antenna, potentially, and basebands and things like that are just definitively hardware. But they seem to be virtualizing more shit every day.
You can still do that from the public cloud, there we go. Your baseband processor.
So there's so much stuff that you can virtualize. I mean, you need a physical antenna.
It's only the antenna, really.
Fair enough.
And the cables you need for fibre and all that stuff, obviously you can't virtualize that.
And you've got to have towers and you've got to have all that.
Yeah.
So, yes. So I agree that you were right to steer it in the direction of that. But having said that, I'm going to talk about two other things. The other significant one was Vodafone, pitched by former podder Jamie Davis, and he'd gone quiet for a bit. I guess Vodafone hadn't had shit to say. I thought maybe he had the arsehole because he pitched something to me a little while back and I just never bothered covering it.
Right.
But no, I think he's more grown up than that. But this was a good story, and basically opening up a new sort of centre for OpenRAN collaboration. And the significance of it isn't just the fact that they're, as I put in my headline, putting the money where their mouth is. And Vodafone, among the UK MNOs, has been the biggest cheerleader of OpenRAN.
Yeah. It's been the only cheerleader for OpenRAN.
Right, well, there we go.
Well, actually, that's not fair. O2's sort of there a little bit as well. But
Vodafone UK's got a bit of a track record of rolling the dice on new technologies. I remember a few years ago, they were banging on about NB-IoT the whole time to an extent that other people weren't.
Yeah, that went well.
That went well.
Good one there, Vodafone.
But they've kept going, so fair play to them.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the point is, and this is how it was pitched to me, and I thought, yeah, fair enough, I agree with you. Leaving aside that I'm obviously mates with the person doing the pitching, that OpenRAN's only going to work if vendors like Mavenir or whatever know what the fuck operators want from it.
Yeah.
And the only way they're going to know is operators create a sort of technical environment where they can come in and they can stress test bits of kit, and then the operator can go, that's not working for us at all. And it's actually a great resource for the vendors, because think of yourself in a commercial point of view. If your customers are creating an environment where you can come in and they can spell out to you precisely what they need before they're going to give you money, that takes all the guesswork out of the commercial proposition, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So they created one of those in Newbury, which is their HQ, sort of halfway to Wales. Perhaps that's why Jamie was so keen on it. Perhaps that's why I joined Vodafone. He's got this calling back to Wales.
It's being rolled out in Wales, isn't it? That's like that's the main market for
Jamie's
it to be deployed.
He's only been there. How long's he been there? Less than a year.
That's why they're recruiting already. It's like, Wales, OpenRAN. We'll have you.
Organisation. So I thought that was a good move.
Yeah.
Did you write that up? Did you have any different takes?
No, I can't remember my head. My line was something like the whole thing is about showing it does exactly what it says on the tin, isn't it, really? Because they need to... We've heard all these promises about OpenRAN, that it allows you to take someone's hardware and someone's software and run them together, and it's all going to work very well because of these specifications. But if you don't have centres like this set up to certify that and prove that it works, then no one really knows. So I think even though the other operators have been more... I think this test centre actually will be bigger than the UK. I think it'll be really important for Vodafone at a regional level, given some of the strategic changes that are happening at Vodafone in terms of having a kind of regional-wide technology strategy. And I also think a lot of other operators will look at this as an operator-led centre, not because Mavenir set one up, I think, as well in the UK this week, which is kind of interesting.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to mention. So thanks for stealing my thunder.
I think the service providers doing it are obviously going to attract a lot of attention from other service providers who are going to see what's coming out of this, and they're going to be interested to know whether Vodafone has success and what technologies emerge from it.
And I think good for credit where it's due. Someone's got to lead from the front.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's always going to be enlightened self-interest. They think that OpenRAN has commercial advantages, but at least they're leading from the front.
Because, in a market like the UK where, it's interesting why operators are doing OpenRAN, why they are taking in, a fascination in it. Because it's not the kind of thing that shareholders are going to go, OpenRAN, I'm really interested in you getting... I mean, I suppose it depends how you look at it, because Orange's CTO had a really different perspective on it today when he was chatting about OpenRAN. And they've said this before as well in the past, that we hear OpenRAN talked about in the context of getting new suppliers into the market and lowering costs and diversification and all this stuff. Which, if you're someone looking at your quarterly earnings, you're a shareholder in these companies, to be honest with you, you don't really care. You want it to work. And you want it to be good.
Well, exactly. You care a little bit if it does work, but if it doesn't work, then it's a massive fucking risk.
Exactly. So it's more of a worry for a shareholder, really, why you'd be interested in it. Why would you go and jump into doing something like that? Why would you take that kind of risk? I mean, Orange today was talking about it in a kind of, it allows us to do things we can't do at the moment.
Right.
In terms
of
more
positive.
Yeah, in some new use cases that might emerge from it, being able to... just being able to kind of serve particular segments of the market, perhaps aren't served well.
In the context of Dish and AWS that we were talking about, it seems to fit in with that more general everything being virtualized agility thing.
Yeah, but I don't.
And the network slicing.
I think that story's been so oversold, though.
Yeah,
the agility one. I mean, if you look at the case for OpenRAN cost savings, the basic case for it is not actually very compelling, because if you look at RAN costs as a percentage of the overall bill, and then even if you say they're looking at cutting it by 50%, it ends up working out quite a small amount of the
compared to
overall costs.
CapEx or OpEx.
It wouldn't really sort of mean that they have a huge competitive advantage. Now, it might if they do all sorts of other things on the network as well. Virtualized transport.
They were really ahead of the game in terms of private
transport,
networks and
public
all that,
cloud, all that other stuff. Then maybe that, and automation, maybe all that translates into a big cost advantage. But it's actually quite. And if you ask a lot of the operators, and I think Vodafone said this as well, the CEO, why they're doing OpenRAN, their argument is, that they want more supplier choice. Yeah, they don't want to have this, and this is the government argument for it as well, that they don't want an Ericsson Nokia duopoly. They want more competitors in the market, which is, if you're an investor, why is that something you should really care about? As long as you can get good equipment, and as long as you're providing a good service.
And we've got that point that while we're being nice about our direct competitors, we've got that thing that interview they did on Telecom TV where the BT guy went, I actually don't want loads of competitors, loads of diversity.
I think what he was saying is that he wants choice, but he's not going to use many of them in the network. He'd probably only take one or two. So, but the thing about what Vodafone's doing is that it's deploying this network in parts of the UK, and nobody else is doing that. So if it all goes horribly wrong, and it turns out to be an absolute shit show, and and the complexity of it's a nightmare, and it's all a disaster, that trips them up potentially really, really badly next to BT, O2 and 3, which are going to stick, it seems, with the tried and trusted vendors, because BT's basically ruled out using OpenRAN till 2027.
Right.
3 says it's come too late for 5G. Maybe O2 would do something with it, but I don't see that there's going to be any great desire because they don't have any Huawei in their network. The only company that really, the only companies where there'd be an opportunity to kind of replace it now are ones when they're forced to swap out Huawei.
Yeah.
And the only one that's said it's going to use OpenRAN to do that is Vodafone. So it's taking a really big risk by doing this. If it goes wrong, they lose competitiveness. So they're quite brave in doing it.
Okay, credit where it's due. And as you say, there's a Mavenir thing. And they all coincide with the fact that the government finally, we alluded to it, I think, last week. And yeah, that's it. We got to Friday last week and the government still hadn't said this thing, but it had been leaked to the FT. And it's basically everything we already knew. The government wants UK operators to try and have 25% other vendors. And I'm not going to labour it now, not least because we better move on, and because we also did it last time. But that's so arbitrary and just so, I presume the operators, especially as there's no enforcement mechanism attached to it, the operators are going to yeah, whatever.
Well, unless they do attach an enforcement mechanism to it somehow. But,
but
that's the recommendation from the task force, isn't
that'll
it?
definitely give me something to rant about.
Something to rant about, but I think it's disgraceful. I mean, to be told what supplies you should be using by 2025.
It's back to this central control thing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of that going on at the moment. I mean, look at football.
There fucking is. Oh, I know. We could have a whole podcast just on that Super League, couldn't we? That was hilarious. Anyway, but no, because I'm trying to move us on, so I will. Quarterlies. We both covered Ericsson Quarterlies, which is the big one of the week. Yeah. I'm going to hand it back to you for two reasons. One, when we were chatting about what we're going to talk about, you proposed it. And two, you actually bothered to listen into more stuff. I mean, I did chat to Yedling. Yeah. But I was like on the call straight away there, like, we haven't got long.
Really?
Yeah.
I think when were you? What time were you?
10:45.
I think I ate into your time a bit.
Did you? Yeah. And then there was presumably somewhere at 11. I only took 10 minutes. To be fair, this isn't a diss, Frederick, but I know what you're going to say because I just need to read fucking Boyer's comments, and he never deviates far from Boyer's comments. Yeah. And he's fine. He's a nice lad. It's great chatting to him, but he doesn't tell me too much that I couldn't get from Boyer's comments.
No, that's true.
So I kept to the 10 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the one interesting thing we did have is a sort of broader chat about the market on the whole, and where it's headed and the 5G market. But anyway,
what did you say about that?
Oh, just all you would expect upbeat stuff. Yeah. He's not going to say it's shit, is he?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of stuff about longer cycles than we've seen in 4G and 3G.
Yeah, no, I didn't get that much granularity out of him. Just a general sense that he thinks that we're getting a new phase of investment and post-pandemic and everyone getting stuck in.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, he would say that to some extent, but I don't get the impression with these Ericsson guys. I'm resisting generalising about Swedes because I've been there like twice. Yeah, like I know Swedes really well. But I don't get the impression, they're not inclined towards hype of a US style. Yeah. I think they'll only say it if they think it. They won't just pull shit.
No, they're quite low key. But
so yeah, that was that. But look, I think you listened in on the full analyst call or something. Yeah. So why don't you tell us about Ericsson?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you look for sort of fireworks with any of the vendor updates, especially recently with all the geopolitics going on.
Much fireworks out of Ericsson.
Well, no, not in terms of presentation, but there's often a story there to do with what's going on with Huawei or their turnaround efforts. And their turnaround's basically done now. This is the thing.
It's all going well, isn't it?
It's all going well, and journalists don't really like.
It's boring.
They don't like it when things are going really well.
I think we both took a boring angle.
Yeah.
I think you put boring in the headline, didn't you?
Boringly good. I said it was, and it's good to see in a way, obviously for the company, that it's a real success story. I think I have to say.
Ekholm just gets the fucking credit.
Yeah, he's done a really
done
really
what
good
he said
job.
he'd do.
Yeah, and they're really profitable. I mean, their margins are at the level they said they were going to be, and I think that was the main headline figures were that the sales were kind of flat, although they were up quite a bit on a sort of like-for-like basis. So a lot of it's currency and stuff. But the profits were kind of up a lot because they've just done a really good job on efficiency. They've made a big deal about the increased commitments to R&D, giving them a really sort of cost competitive set of products.
But they've got the right balance, and they haven't overspent on R&D.
Yeah, and they've got out of areas they didn't need to be. There's a couple of curious things in there, I thought. The drop off in IPR revenues, obviously.
Yes, that was a mention.
Licensing issue where it come down a lot.
Is that to do with the stuff going on in the US or something? Or
Samsung no, I mean it was written up in Reuters sort of referenced the Samsung dispute, which is ongoing, and they'd said this before, hadn't they? This could wipe quite a bit off operating profit starting this quarter, but that didn't seem to be the reason that the sales from licensing were down a lot. Curiously, the reason sales from reading between the lines, and they didn't name it directly, but I think the reason that licensing sales were down so badly is because Huawei did so badly on phone sales.
Oh, right.
So Huawei obviously pays.
Yes, and there would have been a quarter lag because, I mean, this quarter, I covered Strategy Analytics numbers.
Yeah.
And it bounced back in Q1, but these numbers will be revenues from Q4 or
well, I thought it fell
year.
out the top 5 in Q1.
Yeah, but generally,
right.
If we assume that Ericsson gets a similar amount of smartphone licensing money out of everyone, then
well, I mean, the way Ekholm put it on the call, because he got asked about it, he said there was a big drop off in market share with smartphone shipments for one player in particular due to geopolitics,
right?
And that
Sherlock Holmes to join the dots.
There's no other company that fits the bill, really.
No.
And I just thought there was an interesting angle on it's almost one of these whack-a-mole things, isn't it? You don't see some of the unintended effects of what goes on. And now it didn't hurt them that badly, obviously, because licensing revenues are actually quite a small part of what they make in overall sales.
But in the mix.
There are some things for them to sort of be maybe slightly nervous about. The whole kind of semiconductor supply chain crunch. I did ask Edling about that. I mean, they seem to think they've done enough to cope with that.
Well, that was an interesting thing. So when we were chatting about it before, because I was pushing back on talking about Ericsson's quarterlies just because the aforementioned boringness of them.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned there's also Intel's quarterlies, and I was pushing back even harder on that because I was like, gives a fuck about Intel in the mobile space.
Yeah.
But, you talk about semiconductor crunch. Why don't you, I'll tee you up there. Why don't you tell us why we should care a bit more than I realised?
Intel's a big supplier to Nokia and Ericsson for base station processors.
Yeah,
basically.
I didn't even realise.
The baseband processors are from companies like, it's one of the players in that market, along with companies like Marvell and Xilinx, and so Nokia names them because I think it had to. It had so many problems in trying to address all of its 5G product difficulties that it ended up sort of being really transparent about it and coming out with the names of its suppliers.
I thought that Nokia's problem with Intel was Intel as a foundry. But you're saying that quite a lot of because I remember 2 or 3 years ago.
I don't think it says as a foundry.
Yeah,
no.
well, let me just finish. I'm sure you're right. 2 or 3 years ago, Nokia pitching me on their chip expertise. They're going, look at us, we can make chips.
Yeah,
aren't we great? I was like, oh, fucking well played, Nokia. I didn't think that would be a thing for you.
Yeah,
but you reckon a lot of those chips?
No. I talked to Tommy Wito about it, and they have their own in-house capabilities as well, but they have 3 companies they're working with basically on base station processors, and they were very reliant on Intel before, which is one of the problems because they sort of got let down, and then they diversified to. Well, it's not Xilinx. I don't think it's Xilinx, or they might be in there.
You'd think Xilinx was in there with the FPGA stuff, wouldn't you?
I think they maybe are a bit, but the big ones that they've kind of come out and named are Broadcom, Marvell, and Intel.
Right.
Are the kind of 3 that were sort of named as.
I remember a Marvell press release.
So they basically stuck with Intel. and have now said it's doing better. Now the problem, I think, was that transition to 10 nanometer designs that Intel was having problems with. I think upset some of Nokia's sort of product roadmap.
Yeah, well,
basically.
Intel's been. I mean, it seems to still be doing all right. I don't know how, because on the surface, it's been a fucking car crash with all the
well, they were out. So their results were out last night, which I took a look at as well.
I didn't look at them.
They're kind of flattish on sales. And their profits were down about 6%. Their net income. Now, one of the reasons for that is that they're pumping money into trying to catch up on 7 nanometer, which is an area where they'd fallen behind. They'd fallen behind other big companies in the world that do that, like Samsung and TSMC. So that's one of the reasons that the profit was down, and the other one is kind of related, I suppose, to the beginnings of this plan to spend quite a lot of money on setting up new fabs in Arizona, and actually become more of a foundry business. And
that's a funny thing. They were set with these fabs in Arizona. I got the impression that one of the biggest challenges with a lot of these places is cooling.
Right?
What are they doing building them in the middle of the fucking desert?
There's just a lot of space, isn't there?
I know.
Yeah, I suppose.
That was just facetious. I'm sure there are good reasons.
But the reason for their sales being flat, is they did really well on the computing side of things, which is the big business unit. So I think they make about 11 billion a quarter from chips in PCs and stuff.
And data centers.
Which is more than, so their overall revenues, I think this time round, were 18.5 maybe. And the second biggest business unit is data centers, which I think also covers things like what they do for, even though it doesn't sound like
Telecoms.
Data centers, but it will cover stuff that they do that goes into the baseband side of things.
Right.
And then when we talk about deals like the Dish and AWS one, it becomes Intel in a more sort of OpenRAN context there. So their FlexRAN platform is this thing that they're positioning very much as something that can be used in OpenRAN. But that was the thing that tripped them up this time round. The reason the sales were flat is because that fell a fifth.
Did it?
Yeah. Now I don't know semiconductors as well as a lot of other people, including you. So I had to sort of do some reading around. But
it was a thing for me in a previous life.
Well, I went over the transcript of the call because a lot of analysts were asking about it, and sort of reading between the lines and what they said, there seemed to be several reasons why those revenues suffered. One is they did really well last year, so you never have a very, very favourable comparison. Yes. And they said a lot of companies are still sort of running down inventory that they accumulated. Another one was ASPs had fallen because they started selling some cheaper products in the mix. But another one, which a lot of analysts were sort of alluding to, is just rising levels of competition in that market from people like AMD, which is one of their big competitors.
Doing well.
And also, which is alluding to what we just talked about before when Pierre went, what the hell is that? Graviton. Cloud companies doing their own designs, basically.
Sounds like something like Flash Gordon.
And not... It does, yeah. And,
bring out the Graviton.
Graviton.
And not buying from. So these are sort of ARM-based things actually that are a bit. Graviton's ARM. It's an ARM core.
And Amazon's got good names like that. Do you remember a few months ago I was taking a piss out of another Amazon product? It was called something like the Mindfuck 2000 or something.
Yes,
like that.
You got told off for it. You got your wrist slapped by Amazon. Not taking it seriously enough.
They're not helping themselves with names like this. They need to go. They need to call it the Fluffy Bunny or something. Anyway.
But this seems to have hurt them a little bit. I mean, the cloud companies doing their own designs, they played that down a lot. They said that's very early days for that, and there's not a lot of competition there at the moment. But it's certainly something you could see becoming maybe a bigger deal for them in the future. So
and then back to Ericsson, basically ticking along nicely.
Yeah, everything's
doing all right. I tell you, in terms of geography, so I tend to focus a little bit more on just the top line, just drilling down a little bit into what has brought about the growth or lack of it. And by their region that really kicked ass was Northeast Asia, not China. So basically South Korea and Japan.
Yeah.
So something's doing really well there. And the inference is... So you always got the impression they were ahead of the curve in their 5G build out anyway, especially in South Korea.
Yeah.
But obviously it's ramping, so that's back to the narrative.
I think Japan as well a lot.
Yeah, they're ramping a lot, and you don't hear about big deal wins. I don't ever remember writing up a SoftBank or an NTT deal win or something like that. But
no, they've named some of the Japanese companies.
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
yeah.
That's just me being.
But they haven't
job.
attached. You know, in the US, they actually came out with the amount of money that was being spent. I think, didn't they? Whereas they haven't sort of put dollar figures on it or anything like that. But yeah, I mean,
so they did really well out of that part of the world. They're still doing pretty healthy in Europe.
Yeah, even though it's not growing, it's.
I think about the only region that shrunk for them was Middle East.
Yeah. Latin America, I don't think did particularly well for predictable reasons to do with all the problems they're having with coronavirus.
But in basically developed markets, they're kicking ass.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, if you're trying to be skeptical of their future, which I'm not, by the way, I'm just, you know, if you look at things and say where could it go wrong, I think that the danger points for them at the moment are China's one. And they've already brought this up themselves.
That's why
because they had
keeps talking about lay off Huawei.
Yes, exactly. So they're worried, and this is quite relevant at the moment because in the next few weeks we're expecting another round of 5G, another 5G tender in China, the kind of successor to what happened last year, which means going, as I understand it, going outside the big cities and putting up equipment in less densely populated areas. There's a huge amount of work to be done there.
Yeah,
I think China Mobile's talking about spending even more money this year than it did last year.
Didn't you write a piece about how they're shitting themselves a little bit on the cost of it all? I thought I saw something.
China Mobile's, yeah. Well, they're talking about. I think they were more talking about operating costs and a rise in electricity expenses.
Fine.
But they do have.
I just saw the headline.
They do have a higher capex fee this year projected as well,
right.
and they're planning on spending a huge amount just on 5G. It's ridiculous. I think more than last year. I think. So if Ericsson,
it's such a ridiculously big market.
It's massive, and this is the thing. They did pretty well last year. Picked up this share that's only like 11 or 12%, but it's better than they'd done before a little bit. And in a market where you've got 700,000 base stations being built, it's a huge amount of business. So the danger for them now is that with Sweden being quite aggressive on Huawei and banning it from Sweden's market, that China takes a look at this and goes, hang on a minute, we're not going to give any work to Ericsson in this second phase.
That's been an anxiety,
you know, and feasibly what they could decide to do is give the Chinese vendors an even bigger share, or maybe they might even come along, because Nokia is now talking about being a bit more aggressive in China all of a sudden, and maybe we can get back some of
Finland hasn't pissed off China.
No, so maybe they decide to transfer this second phase stuff where Ericsson did well in the first phase. Why not reward Nokia in the second phase?
With every passing week, was it Pierre shared a thing this week about there being some app where Chinese people can grass each other up for just not looking patriotic or not looking
how is it
devout enough.
Mistaken opinions, I think.
Yeah, mistaken. I mean, you know, it's overused, but you know, even Orwell would be like, "Nah, you're taking a piss now." So people can go, "Well, this person appeared to have, you know, an insufficiently zealous expression on their face or something."
Yeah,
it's just pure out of the 1984 playbook.
That's bizarre.
Anyway, so the only reason I mention it isn't to bash China, but to bash the regime.
Yeah.
And you know, if this guy is feeling as sort of aggressive as he seems to be, then he's not gonna let Sweden get away with banning.
Well, it's a bit of a worrying time for them.
And Ericsson's basically a proxy for Sweden,
China.
isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it would hurt them because China's been I think it's about 8% of sales, China. So you know, if they suddenly, you know, stop, if work dries up this year because China has retaliated, then it would show up. It would make a big impact, and I think that's one risk for them. And another one, I suppose, is, you know, kind of OpenRAN. You know, not OpenRAN in itself, but the desire of operators to diversify and use other vendors. Yes. You know, I mean, they alluded to this on the call, actually.
Has dragged its feet on this.
It's dragged its feet a bit, and it's also, you know, it's been quite bullish about growing market share. You know, we can keep, and they have been doing. They've kind of gone up and up in the last sort of 2 or 3 years and reclaimed some of the territory that they lost to Huawei, and that's probably going to carry on to some extent because Huawei's losing out in some of these markets. But I just wonder, I mean, this was asked on the call by analysts, you know, how far can you go? Is there a point where operators start to go, well, we don't want Ericsson getting too big, and we don't just want to give what we don't give to Ericsson to Nokia. You know, does OpenRAN, even if they do embrace OpenRAN, even if Nokia comes along and embraces OpenRAN, do operators just go with other companies because it's not really about OpenRAN? It's actually just about getting other companies there in the mix and keeping it diverse.
Yes.
And having competition. I think that's maybe a concern for them, that a lot of that OpenRAN work is not work for them. It's actually work that operators want to give to other companies. So
no, it's obviously a threat.
Who do you reckon is going to win, by the way, while we're still in OpenRAN vaguely, in Vodafone's tender in the UK, where they're talking about using it at 2,500 sites? Because I've got a hunch that Mavenir would be top of
this place they just opened up this week was just down the road from Newbury, wasn't it?
They've opened that up. They bought a UK company recently, IP Access. They're already being trialled by Vodafone in the UK, I think. I'd be very, very surprised if Mavenir doesn't figure as the software company.
They've got to be the bookies' favourite
on the software side, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and just as a partner on the whole, as I think I made abundantly clear last week, I don't know what Mavenir does as well as I should do, given that I'm the editor of Telecoms.com.
Yeah.
But there we go.
Well, they're the baseband software, basically,
aren't
they?
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah. And they're interesting as well because there was this investment in them this week, which is the other OpenRAN news, I think, which I didn't cover.
Yes.
But I was vaguely aware of it from other people. Right. I don't know if you wrote about it, but they
Mary wrote it up, but I sort of went, why didn't you write this up?
Yeah, but I suppose it's significant because it's
they've even got a new logo.
Fairly big.
They've got
company.
an M with a red line under it.
Oh, really?
They're not fucking around.
So the FT put it as this company's making a big bet on the software firm.
They seem to be. We haven't heard that much from Parallel for a while, have we?
They've been a bit quiet. It's true.
Yeah. But they're a company that was making a fair bit of noise. I don't know what the reasons are.
They're very focused on emerging markets. Parallel. They do quite well in Africa. They've had deals in Indonesia recently, I think. You do wonder, are they... this is a question for them. Maybe I should ask it after, early next week. But are they deciding that they need to focus on those emerging markets more and maybe not worry so much about some of the high-end 5G stuff at the moment? While Mavenir and Altiostar seem to be quite keen on targeting those opportunities and maybe not worrying about the emerging markets. So
that brings in the other one, further to your question. So we agree Mavenir's a bookie's favourite. Altiostar, I just wonder how intimately associated Altiostar is with Rakuten.
Very intimate, but it's owned by it.
Such that, unless you're signing up to this Rakuten, like they've got their sort of virtualization in a box or whatever thing they're doing.
Yeah.
Unless you sign up to them, is Altiostar just totally associated with Rakuten now, such that you don't deal with them unless you're going whole hog?
It's even being sold through the Rakuten platform, isn't it? The Rakuten community. And this comes back to where we came in with all this, the clouds trying to package up stacks and, offer customers. So Rakuten's communication platform includes Altiostar, but it also includes a lot of the other things that that Rakuten's been using in its own Japanese rollout. Inouye, I think, is a company it's been using on the OSS side.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean you have to go and sign up to this and get all these vendors and be driven towards that particular roadmap. But I bet there's some pricing incentives in there to do that, yeah?
Yes.
Because Inouye is another company where they have an ownership stake.
And back to the tech nationalism, there's a distinctly Japanese, and I'm not saying Japanese good or bad, but, there's a pro-Japan thing around Rakuten.
Yeah. There's a kind of US-Japanese tech alliance kind of shaping up, isn't there, at the moment? I feel.
Yeah, well, I bet the US, given all the sort of argy-bargy that's going on with China, I bet the US is doubling down on it, schmoozing the
and I
Japanese.
think OpenRAN has quite a big role in it, and some of the radio companies, Fujitsu and, NEC seem to be, trying to do quite well in the US market and spotting opportunities there. Fujitsu is a company that Dish is using, isn't it, I think, for actual radio units. And
right. Complete tangent, by the way. But I was reading something on The Spectator on the train on the way in, about how Putin's getting a bit more tasty now. There's apparently like thousands of troops on the fucking Ukraine border.
Yeah.
And it was their lead political guy, a guy called James Forsyth. He was talking about how while China and Russia might not be working in direct concert, because I think they've got their own little bits of friction between each other and all that sort of thing, and they have got a direct border after all.
Yeah.
But it kind of benefits each one. Each time there's a bit of aggro. So if we take the West as a block, which means Western Europe, America and its allies, Australia, North America, whatever. If there's some aggro in Ukraine, then we've got to focus our attention there. Apparently, Trump was going to pull out a bunch of troops from Germany, and Biden's reversed that, which by the sounds of it is probably a good move, given all the saber rattling going on from Putin. But the problem is, it's difficult for us to fight on two fronts. I say fight, metaphorically fight. Difficult for us to address our attention to two fronts. So can we handle Putin in Ukraine and China and Taiwan at the same time? So yes, that's all a bit worrying. So I would imagine there's a lot of geopolitical diplomacy. I imagine America's being very nice to South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, etc. Meanwhile, it's trying to be nice to Germany. I think relations are quite strained between Germany and the US. Germany's got this gas pipeline from Russia that's pissing off the Yanks.
The Germans just seem to be into kind of realpolitik, don't they? And they don't,
Yeah, and they seem to be very much in the middle of it all.
It's like their relations with Huawei. They don't seem to want to upset Huawei because they're worried about, their exports to China. And, they're worried about, what Sweden's done would really have repercussions for Germany that could really upset its economy. So they...
there's a lot of House of Cards stuff going on. Anyway, we better move it on because is that where you were starting to give me looks? Pierre was starting to give me looks. For those not seeing my face on the video,
it's because we've been on for 2 hours already.
Yeah, something like that. I think we're definitely done at least an hour, haven't we? So we'll make this short and quick. There isn't that much to say about the AI stuff. Let me just remind myself of the piece I wrote. So my headline was, Europe moves to ban any AI tech it doesn't like the look of. So go on. So that was a sort of standard Scott having a pop at the EU. I'll say it again. I've said it plenty of other times on the pod. Half the time when I have a pop at the EU, it's because it makes me laugh when pro-EU people have a little hissy fit in the comments.
It's purely for that.
God, that's really good, that.
There's a real... just so you know, Ian's just been swigging from my hip flask, which has got some Buffalo Trace bourbon in it. And
I'm going to have to go and buy some of that this evening.
He's digging that shit. Well, I'm telling you, it's the poor relative of Eagle Rare.
I can't remember what Eagle Rare tastes like. I remember enjoying it.
Yeah, it was great. Remember, Pierre gave it to you like for your birthday, or
it lasted like a day
because you just had an operation or something.
Yeah,
exactly. It went down far too well.
Didn't touch the side.
Exactly. Yes. So I can't remember what I was just meandering about. Anyway, yes, doesn't like the look of. So European Commission's come out with this sort of framework or these proposed rules for governing AI, artificial intelligence. And on one level, fair enough. I'm the first one to go Terminator, Matrix, etc. If we give people like fucking Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk half a chance, there's a thing I haven't spoken about before, but a story I wrote up I think last week. There's Boston Dynamics.
Oh, the
robot dogs. Yeah, but they got them walking around New York now.
Yeah,
they've actually got them walking around
some
New York.
of the studio footage of them with the ones that do acrobatics.
But this isn't studio footage. They've actually got them on the street now.
That's frightening. That's you refer to that Black Mirror episode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are they doing on the streets of New York?
Yeah, they've got these little robot dogs.
Doing what?
They're pets for people. Sad people who like electronic pets rather than flesh and blood ones.
They right now they're positioned as surveillance because they don't have much speed. They only go about 3 miles.
Surveillance?
What?
Yeah, so they've got little cameras built in, isn't it?
Oh, nice.
So they can just go around filming everything.
So in future they can run after you as well.
So like barely a day goes by in the States before you get some shooting that's recorded on a body cam, and then it all goes on the internet. Everyone goes fucking crazy. I'm not even going to get into the minutiae of those because it's a different matter entirely.
So then those dogs probably have a little sentry gun built inside that deploys.
Well, that's it. And they can only go 3 miles an hour. So, that Black Mirror episode,
How fast?
Metalhead, 3 miles an hour. So they can't chase even me.
Yeah.
I'd like to think.
You could just knock them over.
Yeah. But, 3 miles an hour now. But the way they walk around is full Terminator, it looks quite sort of organic the way they move, and that's.
3 miles an hour is sort of a decent walking pace.
Well, they can get around, but they can chase you.
No.
But anyway, but that's not what I want to talk about. But there's one other little dystopian AI implementation, and so I can see why Europe wants to do this. Totally fair enough. But of course, it being Europe, it's just got to bring it all into this great big fat bureaucracy, and so I can't remember what they're calling it, but they're just they come up with a risk scale. Okay, just like in England, every time we want to communicate something to the public that has any nuance in it, we talk about a traffic light system. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Fucking red, yellow, green. It's like red bad, yellow all right, green go for it. It's like, I can't understand that. And so that's what they've gone with this risk scale, and they've gone.
Well, they amber. Let me guess.
No, they haven't gone for traffic lights. That's about the only credit I'll give them. But they've gone at the top of the risk scale is unacceptable risk. And you think, well, fair enough. I mean, if it's unacceptable, we're not going to accept it, are we? There's a clue in the name.
DEFCON 1.
Yeah, and they've gone, if it's unacceptable risk, we're going to ban it. And then they move on. And it's like, well, hold on. You could call anything an unacceptable risk.
Yeah.
And then they just ban it. And then they've got another strata where there's more granularity called high risk. And then there's this, that, and the other, critical infrastructure, law enforcement, all that sort of thing. And here's all the hoops they've got to jump through if they're high risk. And then there's low risk, and then there's, do what you want. But the point is that they're just setting up, at the unacceptable level, they're just setting up this thing where if we deem arbitrarily something to be of unacceptable risk, then it's banned. End of. Now, the problem with that, you could go, well, Scott, do you really want this Black Mirror shit going on? Don't you want the European Commission in there banning Black Mirror stuff going on? But do we think it's just going to be Black Mirror stuff? That's always the problem. It's like a thin end of the wedge. I know it's a logical fallacy, the slippery slope fallacy, but it's not a fallacy in this case. If they can start banning things by their own arbitrary sort of measurement system, their own arbitrary scale, then they can ban anything.
Yeah.
They could say, Ian, that fucking T-shirt's not an acceptable risk. And then you got to go around topless. At your stage of life, that's not ideal, is it?
No, nobody wants that.
So
that would be an acceptable risk.
Acceptable risk to women. Yes. So that was the one AI thing I wanted to say, and then the only other one is just it's not quirky, but a sort of tangential thing. A story I wrote today just before I came out. Tesla. Tesla's Elon Musk's electronic car thing, but it's
electric car.
Is it electronic? You
say electric car.
Fucking pedant. Electric car thing, i.e., it's not internal combustion engine. But what's more interesting, certainly from a telecoms point of view, is they're also smart cars. They're all hyper connected, and there's a hell of a lot of intelligence built into them. I don't know how much of a nightmare they're getting from this chip drought. But anyway, and their cars have got a degree of autonomous driving built into them. And I think there's varying degrees. So there's like a driver assist where they just sort of make sure you don't fuck up. But there are ones where you can get it's
like an autopilot, isn't it?
Yeah, just go off and read the paper type of thing.
Or do other things in the car.
Well, indeed. Well, yes, so but you might be alluding to the thing that I mentioned earlier. So there was a car crash with a Tesla car where they found that neither passenger, there were two passengers in it, two blokes, I think, and neither of them were in the driver's seat. So one was in the front passenger seat, one was in the back passenger seat. And of course I was joking.
Was the seat a long way back?
Well, I was joking, and I was just wondering, did the driver just suddenly think, hold on, here's a straight bit of road. Maybe I can pay some attention to the passenger. I'll let our audience decide what form that attention might have taken. But that obviously led to quite a sort of moral panic about, are these things dodgy?
Yeah.
If you engage autopilot, is it going to drive into a tree? And then, it's all horribly wrong. Anyway, and then Elon Musk was tweeting and was going, no, they didn't even have autopilot on that one or whatever. Right. So I'm not making a judgment about Tesla here. This is just another little bit of anecdotal uncertainty that gets thrown into the mix about AI. and how
autopilot sounds
much
quite
we're going to
dangerous
surrender
for
to
me
machines.
on these cars, really.
Say it again?
Autopilot sounds quite dangerous on a car generally to me, because
Well, if it drives into a fucking tree, it is.
It's all done with cameras.
You
as
put
well.
it on autopilot. You're sitting behind the wheel. What's going to happen on a long journey? You're going to doze off, aren't you, or lose concentration?
Some have in
Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah.
I mean,
they had this
I'm
back in
surprised
the
it's
80s.
allowed at all.
Back in the
But-
80s, I remember I used to go and visit my dad in the States, and they had a cruise control.
Yeah, it's the
and all
same
that
thing.
was fixing the speed.
Yeah.
But even that, when you don't even need to worry about your foot on the accelerator, then that's one less thing to keep you from nodding off, isn't it?
Exactly.
The thing is that allegedly the car. First of all, I think there should be pressure sensor in the seat. So if you move the seat, it's like, well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But you need to touch the wheel every now and then as well.
So that was the thing. Have you seen
Yeah.
the Consumer Reports stuff on this?
No.
Okay. So this is part of what I covered. Consumer Reports is like Which or whatever in the States. And they opportunistically heard about this crash and went and did some sort of Top Gear style testing of a Tesla car on their track
Yeah.
to see if they could convince the car, because as Pierre just said, for the like autopilot whatever to work, there are these safeguards that say, we've got to know that there's still someone sat at the wheel.
And sometimes it's a camera, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but it seems in the case of Tesla, it's not, because all they did was hang some weights off the fucking steering wheel, and then they had a lad in the passenger seat, and he was able to use the sort of on steering wheel accelerator, and maybe stick his leg. But he didn't have to be sat in the seat. In other words, they found a way of hacking their system such that you didn't have to be sat in the steering wheel quite easily, just by hanging some weights off the steering wheel.
I saw somebody. This was a while ago. Maybe they fixed it. Where he squeezed an orange in the steering wheel wherever the pressure sensor is.
Right.
He squeezed it there.
And that was enough.
He was like, "Oh, that's it." I don't. But then I think new ones will have cameras that actually pay attention that not only you're there, but
Well,
your
apparently,
eyes are
according
open.
to this Consumer Reports things, like GM and Ford already do.
Yeah.
So I think what will probably happen is this will make Tesla go, fuck it, we better get some cameras involved.
Yeah.
But, it's just another little thing where, let's be careful. I didn't necessarily approve of the EU's approach, not because I don't think AI needs regulation. God knows, I think we can all agree it needs
Yes.
regulating to fuck.
Yeah.
But just the way they did it was just a typical EU arbitrary, let's increase our control type of thing.
Well, there's some kind of world committee on AI.
Yeah, there's all
Elon Musk
sorts
is
of-
part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts
Yeah,
of
but
stuff.
who's under who does that answer to? Well, these world committees are all
Well, quite. What is it, like the
they're
UN
all,
or
they're
something?
all bollocks, aren't they?
The UN
Exactly.
that's just put Iran on its
the
Women's
World
Rights
Radio
Council.
Communications Conference, and then nobody pays any attention to what it decides. But
Quite. So anyway, that's it. I'm not going to invite you actually to talk on that, Ian, because we've run out of time, haven't we?
okay,
More or less.
that's all right. I'll just drink some more of your bourbon.
You're loving it, aren't you? So yeah, we'll call it a day there. And the other reason I'm not going to invite you is I'm fucking bursting, if I'm honest. So we will wrap it up there. And thanks a lot for listening. And make sure you join us for the next one.